You know, some stories start with a bang, a gunshot, a scream. But this one starts with a sound that's even more final. The lonely whistle of a locomotive, piercing the cold Wyoming air, one last time. The train lurches forward, and for Eliza Turner, standing on that splintered wooden platform, it feels like the whole world is lurching away with it. She clutches her worn canvas bag to her chest, a useless anchor in a sea of dust and disappointment. The iron beast shrinks into the horizon, belching black smoke into a sky the color of slate. The year is 1885, and she has just been abandoned. Again. The wind is a bitter, invisible thing, whipping at her threadbare shawl. It sends dried leaves skittering across the platform, dancing around her feet like tiny, mocking ghosts. The few townsfolk who'd been watching, their curiosity satisfied, begin to turn away. But their whispers cut through the cold sharper than any knife. Another one left standing at the station. A woman mutters, "It's Mrs. Henderson, the wife of the general store owner, and she makes no effort to be quiet." You'd think they'd learn by now. Her friend shakes her head, her lips pursed in a look of grim satisfaction. Mail order bride, wasn't she? Third one this year. These men send for a pretty picture, then get scared when a real woman shows up. Eliza's knuckles turn bone white as she grips her bag. She wants to scream at them. She wants to tell them about the letters. 14 of them. 14 letters from a man named James McKinnon, each one a brushstroke in a beautiful painting of a life she so desperately wanted. Promises of a small ranch, of respectful companionship, of a home, a real home. She wants to tell them how she sold every last piece of her old life in Chicago, her mother's silver comb, her father's pocket watch, even her only warm winter coat, all just to afford the ticket that brought her to this exact spot, this place of broken promises. But the words get stuck in her throat, a hard lump of shame and fury. The platform empties out, leaving her alone with the settling dust and the fading smell of coal smoke. Her legs give out, and she sinks onto a rough wooden bench, the weight of it all just too much to bear. This wasn't supposed to happen again. Not after Boston, not after Philadelphia, not after St. Louis. 4 times. This was the 4th time she had scraped together everything she had, put her faith in a man's written words, and traveled across the country only to be rejected. The first man took one look at her copper-tinted skin, her high cheekbones, a gift from her Cheyenne mother, and declared he'd been deceived. The second claimed urgent business. But she'd seen him through a saloon window not an hour later, laughing with his friends. The third never even bothered to show. And now James McKinnon. He had seemed so different. In his letters, he'd sounded kind, thoughtful. He was the only one who didn't flinch when she wrote honestly about her mixed heritage. In fact, he'd written back the words that made her dare to hope one last time. Mixed heritage. No impediment. It was all a lie. She touches the small leather pouch hidden beneath her collar. Inside, a smooth river stone, her mother's protection charm. Maho watches over all his children, her mother used to say, using the Cheyenne name for the Great Spirit. But as Eliza sits there, shivering in the Wyoming wind, she feels utterly unseen, completely alone. The sun bleeds across the prairie, painting the endless landscape in shades of orange and rust. The town of Cedar Ridge is a handful of tired, weather-beaten buildings huddled together against the vast emptiness. Yellow light and loud laughter spill from the Lucky Dollar saloon. She has 17 cents in her purse. Not enough for a room, not enough for a meal, just enough to be a ghost in a town that already resents her for existing. The wind picks up again, carrying the sharp, clean scent of snow. She pulls the thin shawl tighter, but the cold is already deep in her bones. It feels like it's coming from the inside out. "Ma'am." The voice is gruff, and it makes her jump. She looks up to see the station master, an old man with kind eyes hiding under a forest of bushy gray eyebrows. "Station's closing for the night," he says gently. "You got somewhere to go?" Eliza straightens her spine, pulling together the last shreds of her dignity like a tattered blanket. "I'm waiting for someone," she lies, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "He must have been delayed." The old man's face softens with pity, and somehow that feels 100 times worse than the townspeople's contempt. He knows she's lying. Of course he knows. Well, can't let you freeze out here, he says. There's a bench outside the church down the way. Pastor Williams, he don't mind folks resting there. He hesitates, then reaches into his pocket. Here. He presses a small paper ticket into her hand. My wife runs the boarding house. This'll get you breakfast in the morning. A hot one. Tears sting her eyes. It's always the unexpected kindness that breaks her. I couldn't. You can and you will, he says, his voice firm but not harsh. He tips his cap and shuffles away before she can argue, leaving her holding the ticket like a fragile prayer. She stands up, her body stiff with cold and sorrow. The church isn't far, but every step feels like a mile. Eyes watch her from behind curtains as she walks down the dusty main street. A woman alone was a curiosity. A woman like her, she was a scandal. The bench beside the small, white-steepled church is hard and cold, but it's sheltered from the biting wind. She curls up, using her bag as a pillow, and stares up at the sky. The first stars are appearing, sharp and brilliant in the deepening twilight. They look cold and impossibly far away. She thinks of the words in McKinnon's advertisement, seeking respectable woman, gentle disposition, mixed heritage, no impediment. Had he ever meant them? Or was it all just a cruel game? A child's laughter rings out from a nearby house, followed by the soft murmur of a mother's voice. The sounds of family, of belonging, the sounds of everything she will never have. The tears finally come, hot and silent against the cold skin of her face. She presses her face into her bag, muffling the sobs that shake her small frame. She learned a long time ago that crying changes nothing, but sometimes the grief is a physical thing, a weight that has to be let out. A coyote howls in the distance, a sound as lonely as she feels. She pulls her feet up onto the bench, trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear. The cold seeps deeper. Tomorrow feels like a lifetime away. She doesn't pray. She hasn't prayed since her mother's spirit left this world. But in the crushing darkness, a whisper escapes her lips, carried away by the wind. Please, she breathes into the night. Just once. Let someone see me. She doesn't know it yet, but someone has. Someone is watching. And tomorrow won't bring more of the same. Tomorrow will bring a little girl with eyes full of sorrow, a desperate man with a dark secret, and a town that is hiding something far more terrifying than simple prejudice. Her journey isn't over. In fact, it's just begun. The dawn arrives thin and brittle, painting the sky in pale shades of pink and gray. Eliza wakes up feeling like a block of ice. Every joint in her body screams in protest as she sits up. A delicate layer of frost covers her shawl like a shroud of tiny diamonds. The town is slowly waking up, smoke curling from chimneys, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoing in the still air. Her stomach twists with a hunger so sharp it's painful. The meal ticket. She remembers the station master's kindness and feels a flicker of something that might be gratitude. She finds the town pump behind the church and splashes the brutally cold water on her face, the shock of it making her gasp. She rebraids her dark hair as best she can without a mirror, her fingers numb and clumsy. There's nothing to be done about the dark circles under her eyes, or the hollow look of a person who has run out of hope. The boarding house is easy to find, a 2-story clapboard building with a sign that reads, Mrs. Coleman's Respectable Lodgings. She takes a deep breath and pushes the door open, bracing herself for the stares she knows are coming. The dining room is warm and filled with the heavenly smells of coffee and frying bacon. A few ranch hands and railroad workers are scattered at long tables. As she steps inside, the conversation sputters and dies. Every eye turns to her. She keeps her gaze fixed on the floorboards and walks to an empty table in the farthest corner, feeling their judgment like a physical weight. A plump, gray-haired woman, Mrs. Coleman, she assumes, approaches her table. Eliza prepares for the worst, but the woman's voice is surprisingly gentle. You must be the young lady my Henry mentioned, she says quietly, referring to her husband, the station master. Sit yourself down, dear. I'll bring you something hot. The breakfast is the most wonderful thing Eliza has ever tasted. eggs, thick-cut bacon, fluffy biscuits smothered in gravy, and coffee so strong it could raise the dead. She eats slowly, trying to make it last, because she has no idea when she'll eat again. She's so lost in the simple pleasure of a warm meal that she doesn't notice the small figure approaching her table. Not until a tiny hand tugs on her sleeve. "Are you sad?" Eliza looks down and finds herself staring into a pair of enormous brown eyes. A little girl, no older than 4 or 5, is standing beside her. Her hair is the color of wheat and hangs in 2 lopsided braids. Her dress is patched but clean, but it's her expression that stops Eliza's heart. A solemn, knowing sadness that doesn't belong on the face of a child. Eliza glances around, looking for the girl's parents, but no one is paying them any attention. I'm just tired from my journey," Eliza says. The little girl climbs onto the bench beside her as if she's been invited. "I get sad sometimes too," she says, her voice as serious as a judge's. "Papa says it's 'cause I miss Mama, but I don't remember her much. She went to heaven." A pang of sympathy, sharp and painful, goes through Eliza. "I'm very sorry about your Mama." "Me too," the girl replies. She studies Eliza with an unnerving directness. "You're pretty. Your skin looks like honey. Mrs. Garrett at the store says you must be an Indian. But I think you look like a princess from one of Papa's stories." Heat rushes to Eliza's cheeks. Before she can think of what to say, the girl scoots closer. "My name's Annie," she announces. "Annie Hale. What's yours?" "Eliza." "That's pretty too." Annie reaches out and touches Eliza's hand. Her little fingers are warm. "Your hands are soft, not like Papa's. His are all rough and scratchy from the farm." "Annie!" A deep voice calls from the doorway. "Annie, where did you—" "There you are." Eliza looks up, and her breath catches in her throat. The man filling the doorway is tall and broad, with dark, unruly hair and the shadow of a few days' beard on his jaw. His clothes are worn denim and flannel, the clothes of a man who works with his hands. But it's his eyes that capture her. They're gray as a storm-tossed sea, and they hold a weariness so profound it mirrors her own. "Papa," Annie chirps, scrambling off the bench. "I found a lady. She's sad, just like us." The man's weathered face flushes a dark red. "Annie, you can't just go bothering folks." His gaze flicks to Eliza for a split second before darting away. "My apologies, ma'am. She gets notions." "She was no bother," Eliza says softly. "She's a very sweet child." Something shifts in the man's expression. Surprise, maybe. He steps into the room, his big frame moving with a strange, careful grace, as if he's afraid of breaking something. "Can she come home with us, Papa?" Annie asks suddenly, her voice ringing with hope. "She doesn't have anywhere to go. I heard Mrs. Coleman telling Mrs. Garrett she slept on the church bench all night." The silence that follows is thick and suffocating. Eliza wishes the floor would open up and swallow her whole. The man, Thomas Hale, she presumes, looks utterly mortified. "Annie, that's not— You can't just invite people." "But Papa, look at her," Annie insists, her voice dropping to a loud whisper that everyone in the room can hear. "She's all alone. Maybe she could be my new mama." Eliza closes her eyes. This is a new kind of humiliation. To have her desperation, her loneliness, laid bare for the entire town to see by an innocent child. "I should go," she says, her voice barely audible as she starts to stand up. "Wait." His voice is gruff, but not unkind. It stops her. "Please, ma'am, finish your breakfast." He turns to his daughter. "Annie, come here." But Annie isn't listening. She grabs Eliza's hand with both of hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "Please don't go," she begs. "Papa tries to make biscuits, but they're hard as rocks, and he doesn't know how to braid hair proper. And I don't have anyone to sing to me at night." "Annie, that's enough," Thomas says, his voice firm but gentle. He looks at Eliza then, really looks at her for the first time. She sees him take in her worn dress, her exhausted face, the bag at her feet that holds everything she owns. And she sees something in his storm gray eyes that isn't pity, it's recognition. "I'm sorry," he says quietly. "She lost her mother 2 years back. Sometimes she—" He trails off, unable to finish. I understand, Eliza says. She gently pries her hand from Annie's grasp. I lost my mother when I was young too. Annie's eyes go wide. You did? Did it make your heart hurt? Yes, Eliza whispers, the truth of it catching in her throat. It hurt my heart very much. Mine too, Annie says solemnly. Then with a sudden shift in mood, she asks, do you know any songs? Before Thomas can intervene, Eliza finds herself nodding. I know a few. My mother used to sing them to me. Indian songs? Annie asks, her curiosity pure and innocent. Thomas makes a strangled sound. Annie Marie Hale. It's all right, Eliza says, though a familiar tightness grips her chest. Yes, some were Cheyenne songs from my mother, and some were Irish ballads from my father. This seems to stun Thomas into silence. He just stares at her, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. Could you teach me one? Annie pleads. Papa, what if she leaves? What if she gets on the train like the others? The others? The words hang in the air. How many women have come through this town, only to leave and break this little girl's heart? Thomas's jaw tightens. Annie, we've talked about this. We can't ask every woman who passes through Cedar Ridge to come home with us. But this one's different, Annie insists, her voice rising with passion. She's sad like us. She understands. She needs a family, and we need a mama person. The raw honesty of the child's plea silences the entire room. Eliza watches Thomas Hale. She sees him struggling, sees the war between what's proper and what his daughter so clearly needs. He looks from Annie's desperate face to Eliza's, and then he makes a decision. We have a small place, he says slowly, his voice low and directed only at her. 5 miles out of town. It's nothing fancy, but you'd have your own room. If you need a place to stay, just for a few days, until you can figure things out. Please say yes, Annie whispers, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Eliza looks at this broken man and his lonely child, and a crack appears in the wall of ice around her heart. It's not hope. She doesn't know how to hope anymore, but it's something, a possibility, a flicker of warmth in the suffocating cold. I wouldn't want to be a burden, she says, her voice trembling slightly. You wouldn't be, Thomas says, and for the first time, he meets her eyes directly. Truth is, Annie's right. She needs more than I can give her. He hesitates, then adds, and maybe I do too. An hour later, Eliza is sitting on the hard seat of a wagon, wedged between a chattering little girl and a silent, brooding man. Her bag is in the back. The town of Cedar Ridge is shrinking behind them. They're heading out into the vast, empty prairie, toward a future she can't even begin to imagine. She looks at Thomas Hale, at his large, calloused hands holding the reins. He offered her shelter, a stranger, a man who knows nothing about her except that she was abandoned and that his daughter has taken a liking to her. It's a stunning act of kindness. Or is it? A small, cold thought begins to form in the back of her mind. This town, Cedar Ridge, the place James McKinnon was supposed to be. This kind stranger, Thomas Hale, just happens to be here, at the exact moment she's at her most vulnerable. Just happens to need a mama person for his daughter. It's all a little too convenient, a little too perfect. The wind whips a strand of hair across her face, and a sudden chilling suspicion takes root. What if this isn't a rescue? What if this is a trap? What if Thomas Hale isn't the kind Samaritan he appears to be? And what really happened to the man who summoned her here? James McKinnon? The wagon crests a small hill, and Thomas points. That's it. That's home. The homestead is modest, a simple wooden house nestled in a grove of cottonwood trees, looking small and vulnerable against the vastness of the prairie. A thin trail of smoke curls from a stone chimney. There's a barn, a chicken coop, and a sad-looking vegetable garden. It's a lonely place, the kind of place where a person could disappear and no one would ever know. It's not much, Thomas says quietly, as if reading her mind. Built it myself for my Sarah. Annie, oblivious to the sudden tension, bounces on the seat. Come on, Miss Eliza. I'll show you the chickens. Their names are Daisy, Rose, and Petunia. She scrambles down before the wagon has even stopped, a whirlwind of childish energy. Thomas helps Eliza down, his hands barely touching her waist, but she can feel the strength in them. It's a comforting feeling, but also a frightening one. He's a powerful man. She follows him onto the porch, the boards creaking under her feet like a warning. He opens the door and lets her step inside. The main room is clean but stark. It's a man's house, functional and devoid of any softness. A kitchen area on one side, a living space with 2 chairs by a cold fireplace, and 2 closed doors on the other side. But what draws her eye is the photograph on the mantelpiece. A woman with a gentle smile and eyes just like Annie's. "That was Sarah," Thomas says, his voice thick with an old familiar grief. "She was beautiful," Eliza says, and she means it. The woman in the picture looks kind, happy. She was. He clears his throat, breaking the spell. "Let me show you your room. Like I said, it's small." He opens one of the doors. The room is tiny, containing only a narrow bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair. Draped over the chair is a half-finished quilt, the needle still stuck in the fabric as if the seamstress just stepped away for a moment. The pattern is a series of interlocking wedding rings, sewn in vibrant shades of blue and yellow. "Sarah liked to sew in here," Thomas explains. "The afternoon light is good." He gestures to the quilt. "She was working on that just before she got sick. Never got to finish it." He says she got sick, but there's something in his voice, a slight hesitation, that makes Eliza's skin crawl. He seems to be choosing his words very carefully. "I kept meaning to put it away," he continues, not looking at her. "But Annie, she likes to come in here sometimes. Says it still smells like her mama." The grief in his voice feels real, almost suffocating, but the doubt in Eliza's mind is a stubborn, cold thing. He leaves her alone to settle in, and she sinks onto the narrow bed. The house is quiet, too quiet. The silence presses in on her. This room, Sarah's room, it doesn't feel peaceful. It feels haunted. She runs her hand over the soft fabric of the quilt. The stitches are tiny and perfect, a work of love. She looks closer at the intricate pattern, and that's when she sees it. Hidden within the swirls of thread in one of the yellow rings is another shape. It's subtle, almost invisible unless you're looking for it. A small, perfectly stitched bird, a magpie. Eliza's blood runs cold. It's a symbol she knows, a secret sign used by the women in her mother's tribe. It means danger. It means deception. It means the man is not who he seems. Sarah Hale, a woman who was supposed to be a simple homesteader's wife, had stitched a hidden Cheyenne warning into her quilt. Why? What danger was she in? And who was she trying to warn? "Miss Eliza!" Annie bursts into the room, her bright innocence a stark contrast to the dark thoughts swirling in Eliza's head. "Come see the chickens. And the old well. Papa says I'm not supposed to play near the old well, but I can show you." The old well. Every nerve in Eliza's body screams at her to run, to grab her bag and get as far away from this lonely, isolated farm as she can. But she can't. She looks at Annie's trusting face, and she knows she can't just leave. Not until she understands. Not until she finds out what really happened to Sarah Hale. And a terrifying new thought begins to take shape. What if the man who abandoned her at the station, James McKinnon, isn't gone at all? What if he's here? What if the reason she was brought to this farm has nothing to do with kindness, and everything to do with a warning stitched into a dead woman's quilt? The days that follow are a strange, tense dance. On the surface, everything is peaceful. Eliza falls into a routine. She cooks, she cleans, she helps Thomas with the chores, she makes biscuits, light, fluffy ones, that make Annie squeal with delight. She teaches the little girl the Cheyenne lullabies her mother taught her soft voice filling the stark cabin with a warmth it hasn't known in years. She and Thomas work side by side, a comfortable silence often stretching between them. He's a hard worker, his movements economical and strong. He's gentle with Annie, his love for his daughter a fierce, protective thing that's plain to see. He's respectful towards Eliza, never crossing a line, always keeping a careful distance. He seems like a good man, a decent, grieving man. But the image of that stitched magpie is burned into her mind. The man is not who he seems. She starts to watch him. She notices things. The way his eyes will sometimes go distant and hard when he thinks no one is looking. The way he always keeps the door to his own bedroom locked. The way he flinches whenever she asks a question about Sarah's illness. It was fast, is all he'll say, his jaw tight. A fever. The doctor from town couldn't do anything. She asks about the farm. Did you build the house on empty land? He hesitates for just a fraction of a second, but she sees it. No, he says, his voice carefully neutral. Bought it from a man who was heading west. Name of Peterson. He's lying. She feels it in her bones. The lie is smooth. Too practiced. He's told it before. One afternoon, while Thomas is out mending a fence on the far side of the property, Eliza decides to do some exploring. Annie is napping. The house is quiet. Her heart hammers in her chest as she walks toward the old disused well Annie had mentioned. It's set back from the house, partially hidden by a cluster of overgrown lilac bushes. The wood is gray and rotting, and a heavy cover of thick planks is laid across the top. It looks like it hasn't been touched in years. A sign has been crudely nailed to it. Danger. Keep off. With a surge of adrenaline, she grips the edge of one of the planks. It's heavy, but she manages to pry it up, just enough to peer into the darkness below. A wave of damp, musty air hits her face. It smells of earth and decay, and something else. Something foul. She needs more light. She runs back to the house, grabs a lantern and a long piece of rope from the barn. Her hands are shaking so badly she can barely light the wick. She returns to the well and, taking a deep breath, lowers the flickering lantern down into the blackness. The rope plays out, 10 feet, 20, 30. The light swings, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the stone walls. And then the lantern stops. It has landed on something. She leans over the edge, her eyes straining to see. At first, it's just a lumpy, misshapen shadow. But as her eyes adjust, the shadow takes form. It's a canvas sack, stained and muddy, tied shut with a thick rope. And sticking out of a tear in the canvas is a boot, a man's boot. Worn, scuffed, and horribly, horribly familiar. It's the same style of boot she saw on the man in Boston, the one in Philadelphia, the one who never showed in St. Louis. It was a specific type, favored by Eastern dandies who liked to play at being cowboys. It was the same type of boot James McKinnon had described himself wearing in his very first letter. Panic, cold, and absolute seizes her. She drops the rope, and the lantern goes out, plunging the well back into darkness. She scrambles backward, away from the hole, her breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. James McKinnon isn't gone. He never left Cedar Ridge. He's at the bottom of this well, and Thomas Hale, the kind, grieving widower, he has to be the one who put him there. Sarah's warning wasn't about some abstract danger. It was about her husband. She was married to a murderer, and now so is Eliza. Metaphorically, at least. She's living in his house, eating his food, caring for his child. She's trapped. She stumbles back to the house, her mind racing. She has to get away. She has to take Annie and run. But where would they go? He'd find them. A man who can throw another man down a well and go on living his life as if nothing happened. He wouldn't let them just leave. She bursts into the cabin, her eyes wild. She needs her bag, her 17 cents, her mother's charm. She runs into her room, Sarah's room, and stops dead. Thomas is there. He's standing by the narrow bed, his back to her. He's holding the half-finished quilt in his hands, his large fingers tracing the pattern of the wedding rings. He hasn't heard her come in. He sighs, a deep, sorrowful sound, and then he speaks, his voice a raw whisper, addressed to the quilt in his hands. "Oh, Sarah," he says, his voice breaking. "What am I going to do? She's a good woman. She's so good with Annie. But she's starting to ask questions, and if she finds out what you did, it'll destroy her." Eliza freezes behind him, her blood turning to ice. If she finds out what you did, what did Sarah do? Thomas turns then and sees her. The blood drains from his face. He sees the terror in her eyes, the dirt on her hands, and he knows. He knows she's been to the well. "Eliza," he breathes, his voice full of a despair so profound it shakes the room. It's not what you think. Isn't it? She whispers, her voice trembling. There's a body in your well, Thomas. A man's body. He closes his eyes, a look of pure agony on his face. Yes, he says quietly. His name was James McKinnon. So he admits it. The confession hangs in the air between them, heavy and damning. You killed him, she says, the accusation flat and dead. No, he says, opening his eyes. They're filled with a desperate plea for her to believe him. No, Eliza, I didn't kill him. My wife did. The world tilts on its axis. Every theory, every suspicion she had, shatters into a million pieces. Sarah, kind, gentle Sarah, with the smiling eyes in the photograph. A killer? It's impossible. It makes no sense. You're lying, Eliza says, taking a step back. You're trying to blame a dead woman. I wish I was, he says, his voice ragged. God, I wish I was. But it's the truth. Sarah killed him, and I helped her hide the body. He takes a step toward her, his hands outstretched. Let me explain. Please. You have to understand what he was. What he was. He was the man who was supposed to marry her. He was the man who wrote her 14 letters filled with promises. He came here about 3 years ago, Thomas begins, his voice low and urgent. Bought this land. He presented himself as a gentleman from the East, looking to start a new life. At first, everyone liked him. He was charming, handsome, had money to spend. Thomas's gaze drifts to the photograph on the mantel. Sarah, she was lonely. I was working so hard trying to make a go of this place. I wasn't paying her the attention she deserved. McKinnon saw that. He started visiting when I was out in the fields, bringing her little gifts, filling her head with stories of a grand life back in the city. Eliza's stomach clenches. This is a story she knows all too well, a story of a lonely woman and a charming man with pretty words. I didn't see it, Thomas continues, his voice thick with self-loathing. I trusted him. I trusted her. Then one day I came home early, and I found them, together, right here, in this room. The shame and pain in his eyes are so real, so raw, that Eliza can't help but believe him. We had a terrible fight, he says. Me and Sarah. I told her he had to go, that I wouldn't have him on my land again. She cried. She swore it was a mistake, that she loved me and Annie. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her. A few days later, she told me McKinnon had packed up and left, gone to California. He lets out a shaky breath. For a while, things were better. It was like we had a second chance. Sarah was more attentive, more loving than ever. But there was a shadow in her eyes, a fear I couldn't understand. Then, she got sick. The fever came on so fast. The doctor said there was nothing to be done. She died 2 days later. He finally looks back at Eliza. It was a year later. I was clearing the brush around the old well, planning to fill it in for good. That's when I found him. His body was at the bottom, tangled in a broken rope. Sarah hadn't just told him to leave. She had confronted him. They must have argued. He must have fallen. Or she pushed him. I don't know. All I know is she lied to me. She let me think he was gone when he was down there all along. So what did you do? Eliza whispers. What could I do? He asks, his voice cracking. Turn in my dead wife for murder? Let the whole town know about her affair? Let my daughter grow up with that stain on her mother's name? No, I couldn't. So I covered the well. I told myself he deserved it. I tried to forget. I tried to move on for Annie's sake. He looks at her, his storm gray eyes pleading. And then you showed up, his next victim, answering his advertisement. When I saw you at the station, I knew. I knew he was still reaching out from beyond the grave, still ruining lives. I couldn't let you be stranded. I couldn't let you become another one of this town's sad stories. So I brought you here. I know I should have told you. I'm so sorry, Eliza. The story is plausible. It explains so much. The locked door to his room, where he mourns a wife who betrayed him, the shadow in his eyes, the town's strange hostility. Maybe they suspected something about Sarah and McKinnon. Maybe that's why they're wary of outsiders. But one thing still doesn't make sense. The quilt, Eliza says. her voice steady. The magpie. It's a Cheyenne symbol. It means danger, deception. She stitched it into her quilt. Why? If she was the one having an affair, who was she warning against? Thomas stares at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. Magpie? I I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah didn't know anything about Cheyenne symbols. She was from Ohio. Her people were farmers. Now it's Eliza's turn to be confused. The symbol was perfect, deliberate. It couldn't be a coincidence. Sarah knew exactly what she was stitching, which means Thomas's story, as convincing as it is, has a hole in it, a big one. And then another piece clicks into place. Annie's words from that first day. What if she gets on the train like the others? The townswoman at the station, third one this year. The other women, Eliza says, her eyes locking with his. The other mail-order brides who came to Cedar Ridge. Who were they for? A look of dawning horror crosses Thomas's face. I don't know. I assumed they were for ranchers, men from out of town. And they all just left? Eliza presses. They came all this way and then just got back on a train and left? Does that make sense to you? It doesn't, and they both know it. A terrible, cold dread begins to settle over the room. James McKinnon wasn't just a charming cheat. He was luring women to this isolated town, one after another, and they were disappearing. Sarah must have found out. She wasn't his lover. She was his victim, or she was about to be. The magpie wasn't a warning about Thomas. It was a warning about McKinnon. Sarah knew he was dangerous. She tried to fight him, and he killed her. The fever. It wasn't a fever. It was a lie, a cover story. McKinnon killed Sarah, and then someone else killed McKinnon and threw him down the well. Someone who wanted to silence him. Someone who was his partner. Eliza's blood runs cold as she thinks of the whispers at the train station. The smug, satisfied look on Mrs. Henderson's face. The way the whole town seemed to be in on a secret. A dark, ugly secret. Thomas, Eliza says, her voice low and urgent. We have to go to the sheriff. He shakes his head, a look of despair on his face. The sheriff? Sheriff Brody? He was McKinnon's best friend. They were always together, drinking at the saloon, playing cards. If McKinnon was into something bad, Brody was right there with him. They're not just trapped on a remote farm with a murderer. They're trapped in a whole town of them. The entire place is rotten, and she just led the wolf right to her door. By discovering the body, she's made herself a threat. They will have to silence her, too. Suddenly, the front door of the cabin creaks open. Tom, a man's voice calls out. You in here? Mrs. Henderson sent me out. Said she was worried you folks hadn't been in for supplies. It's Sheriff Brody. He's standing in the doorway, a friendly smile on his face, but his eyes, cold and hard as river stones, are fixed on Eliza. And in his hand, he's holding a shotgun. The smile doesn't reach his eyes. It's the predatory grin of a wolf that has finally cornered its prey. Everything all right in here? Sheriff Brody asks, his voice oozing a false concern. He takes a step inside, the shotgun held loosely but ready at his side. His eyes flick from Thomas's pale face to Eliza's terrified one, and his grin widens. You two look like you've just seen a ghost. Thomas moves, placing himself between Eliza and the sheriff. What do you want, Brody? Just checking on our newest resident, Brody says, his gaze never leaving Eliza. We're a friendly town here in Cedar Ridge. Like to make sure newcomers feel welcome. The way he says the word makes it sound like a threat. Heard a funny thing today. Old Henry down at the station. He said the lady he gave a breakfast ticket to looked an awful lot like the picture in James McKinnon's letters, the ones he used to show off at the saloon. The trap closes. Brody knows who she is. He knows she was meant for McKinnon, and he knows McKinnon is missing. McKinnon left town, Thomas says, his voice tight. Months ago. Did he now? Brody chuckles, a low, ugly sound. That's not what his partner says. His partner says Jimmy had a new bride on the way. Said he was real excited to meet this one. He takes another step into the room, his eyes scanning everything, lingering for a moment on the half-finished quilt. You know, Jimmy's partner is getting real nervous. Jimmy was holding on to something for him, something valuable. Now Jimmy's gone, and the valuable thing is gone with him. Funny, ain't it? Eliza's mind is racing. A partner. Something valuable. This is bigger than just one murder. McKinnon wasn't just luring women here to rob them. There was more to it. Who's his partner? Eliza asks, her voice surprisingly steady. Brody's eyes snap to her. Feisty one, ain't you? I can see why Jimmy picked you. He ignores her question. So here's the situation. Tom, you've been acting strange ever since your wife passed, staying out here all alone. And now you take in a strange woman the very day she arrives looking for a man who's vanished off the face of the earth. It looks suspicious. He's building a story to frame them. What do you want? Thomas repeats, his voice a low growl. I want to have a look around, Brody says. Starting with that old well you've been so keen to keep covered. It's over, he knows. He's not here to ask questions. He's here to clean up a mess. His mess. But as Brody takes a step toward the door, a tiny voice pipes up from the loft ladder. Sheriff Brody? Is that you? Annie. She's awake. She must have been listening the whole time. Brody freezes. The presence of the child complicates things. A flicker of annoyance crosses his face before he replaces it with a sickly, sweet smile. Well, hey there, Annie Bug. Your pop and I were just having a grown-up talk. I heard you, Annie says, her small face peeking around the ladder. You're looking for Mr. McKinnon. That's right, sweetie, Brody says, his voice dangerously soft. You haven't seen him around, have you? Annie is quiet for a moment. Eliza holds her breath. Then Annie says, No, but Mama saw him before she went to heaven. The air in the room becomes thick and heavy. Thomas shoots a panicked look at his daughter. Annie, go back to bed. But Papa, you said we should always tell the truth, Annie insists. She looks directly at Sheriff Brody. Mama told me Mr. McKinnon was a bad man. She said he had a box full of shiny things he took from the other ladies, the ones who came on the train and then had to leave because they got sick. Got sick. The phrase hits Eliza like a punch to the gut. The other women didn't leave. They died, just like Sarah. McKinnon and his partner were poisoning them, taking whatever they had, dowries, jewelry, family heirlooms, and then getting rid of them. Brody's face has gone rigid, the friendly mask completely gone. Is that so? He says, his voice flat and cold. And did your mama tell you where this secret box was? She showed me, Annie says innocently. She said it was our secret. She said if anything ever happened to her, I had to give the secret to someone good, someone who could make the bad men go away. Eliza understands now. Sarah wasn't a victim who fought back in a moment of passion. She was a detective. She had figured out McKinnon's whole horrific scheme. She found his stash of stolen goods, and he killed her for it. But before he did, she passed her secret on to the one person no one would ever suspect, her 4-year-old daughter. The magpie stitched into the quilt. It wasn't a warning. It was a map. Brody takes a menacing step toward the ladder. Well now, Annie, I think you need to tell me that secret. No! Thomas roars, moving to block his path. But Eliza is already moving. Her eyes are locked on the quilt, which is still lying on the bed. The magpie. It's stitched over a specific intersection of the wedding ring patterns. It's not a map of the farm. It's a map of the quilt itself. Her fingers fly over the fabric, tracing the lines of stitching. Underneath the stitched bird, she feels something hard and flat. A small pocket, hidden in the batting. Her fingers tremble as she works at the stitches, pulling them loose. Inside, her fingers close around a small, cold piece of metal. A key. What are you doing? Brody snarls, distracted by her movement. Eliza holds up the key. Looking for this? At that exact moment, Annie, seeing her chance, shrieks, Papa, the fireplace! It's a brilliant distraction. Brody's head whips toward the fireplace, expecting to see Thomas reaching for a hidden weapon. In that split second of hesitation, Thomas lunges. He doesn't go for the gun. He tackles Brody around the waist, driving him backward with all his force. The two men crash into the wall, the impact shaking the small cabin. The shotgun clatters to the floor. Eliza doesn't hesitate. She scoops it up. The metal is heavy and cold in her hands. She's never held a gun before, but a cold, clear certainty fills her. Brody is strong. He throws Thomas off him and scrambles for the gun. But Eliza is faster. She points the double barrels right at his chest. Don't move, she says, her voice trembling but firm. Brody freezes, his eyes wide with shock and fury. He looks from the gun to her face, and for the first time, he looks afraid. The key, Eliza says, her voice gaining strength. What does it open? You'll never find it, Brody spits. We don't have to, Thomas says, getting to his feet. He's breathing heavily, a trickle of blood running from a cut on his forehead. That key fits the deposit box at the bank in Cheyenne. McKinnon used to brag about it. Said he kept his acquisitions there. The whole scheme lays itself bare. McKinnon and Brody were the masterminds, but they needed a respectable front, a place to bring the women, a place for them to get sick and die without raising alarm in town. And who better to provide that than the general store owner and his gossiping wife? It was Henderson, wasn't it? Eliza says, the pieces clicking into place. Mr. Henderson, from the general store. He was the partner. Brody's silence is all the confirmation she needs. Henderson supplied the poison, some sort of slow-acting tincture that mimicked the symptoms of a fever. His wife, Mrs. Henderson, spread the rumors, controlled the narrative, made sure everyone just saw a string of unlucky mail-order brides. McKinnon did the dirty work, and Brody, the lawman, made sure no one ever looked too closely. You killed Sarah, Thomas says, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. She found out, and you killed her. She got what she deserved, Brody snarls, sticking her nose where it didn't belong. He makes a sudden move, a desperate lunge for the gun. But Thomas is ready for him. He slams his fist into Brody's jaw, a sickening crack echoing through the cabin. The sheriff crumples to the floor, unconscious. Silence descends. It's over. But it's not. The real mastermind is still out there. Annie, Eliza says gently without lowering the gun. Stay up there, sweetheart. Close your eyes. She looks at Thomas. His face is a grim mask of grief and fury. We have to end this, he says. For Sarah. For all of them. He finds a rope and ties Brody securely to a chair. Then he looks at Eliza, his storm gray eyes meeting hers. In their depths, she no longer sees suspicion or secrets, only a shared purpose, a shared grief, and something else, something that looks a lot like hope. The Hendersons are expecting Brody to come back, he says. When he doesn't, they'll get nervous. They'll either run or they'll come looking for him. Then we don't wait for them to come to us, Eliza says, a strange, fierce resolve hardening her voice. We go to them. She is no longer the abandoned, frightened woman who stepped off the train. She is a survivor. She is a fighter. And she is about to bring justice to the town of Cedar Ridge. They don't go in guns blazing. That's not Eliza's way. Her mother taught her that the sharpest weapon is the truth, wielded with precision. They wait until the moon is high, a silver disk in a black sky. Thomas leaves a lantern burning in the cabin, a beacon to make it seem like they're still there, waiting. He hitches the horse to the wagon, the sounds muffled by the chirping of crickets. Eliza climbs up beside him, the heavy shotgun resting across her lap. Annie is bundled in blankets in the back, fast asleep, exhausted by the night's terrible events. They don't take the main road. Thomas knows the land, the hidden trails and game paths that cut through the prairie. They circle around, approaching Cedar Ridge from the back, under the cover of darkness. The town is asleep. The only light comes from the saloon and from a single window on the second floor of the general store. The Hendersons' apartment. They're awake. They're waiting. They're nervous. Thomas pulls the wagon to a stop in the shadows of the blacksmith shop. What's the plan? He whispers. We don't confront them, Eliza says, her mind clear and cold. We expose them. She looks at him. The station master, your wife's father, Mr. Coleman, is he an honest man? Thomas nods. The most honest man I know. He never liked McKinnon or the Hendersons. Then he's where we start. They wake Henry Coleman with a quiet knock on the boarding house door. He opens it, his face etched with worry, holding a lamp high. When he sees Eliza and Thomas, his expression shifts to one of profound shock. They tell him everything. They lay it all out in the quiet warmth of his kitchen. The body in the well, Sarah's discovery, Annie's secret, the key, Brody's confession. They tell him about the other women, the ones who got sick and disappeared. As they speak, Mrs. Coleman comes downstairs, her face pale, her hands clutching her robe. She listens, her eyes growing wider with horror. When they finish, there is a heavy silence. Henry Coleman sinks into a chair, his face gray. "I knew it," he whispers. "I knew there was something evil in this town. I felt it. The way those girls would arrive, so full of hope, and then gone." Henderson always said they just lost their nerve, and we believed him. "He controlled everything," Mrs. Coleman adds, her voice trembling with rage. "The supplies, the mail, the credit at the store. He had his thumb on this whole town." "Not anymore," Eliza says. She places the key on the table. "This is the proof. Thomas and I are going to Cheyenne at first light to open that deposit box. We need you to gather the other townspeople, the ones you trust, the ranch hands, the blacksmith. When the sun comes up, we need them to be ready." Henry Coleman looks at the key, then at Eliza. He sees the steel in her spine, the fire in her eyes. He nods slowly. They'll be ready. The rest of the night is a blur of tense waiting. Eliza sits with Annie, who sleeps soundly in a warm bed, finally safe. Thomas stands watch by the window, a sentinel guarding his family. They don't speak much. They don't have to. A bond has been forged between them in the heat of fear and the fight for survival. It's stronger than any promise ever written in a letter. Just as the first hint of dawn streaks the eastern sky, a rider comes galloping down the main street. It's one of the ranch hands Henry had sent for. He pulls up in front of the general store and starts yelling, "Fire! Fire out at the old Hale place! The cabin's on fire!" It's a lie, a brilliant lie, orchestrated by Henry Coleman. Just as they'd predicted, the door to the general store bursts open. Mr. Henderson comes running out, his face a mask of panic. He thinks Eliza and Thomas are trapped, that his problems are about to be burned away. He's running toward the fire, toward the evidence of his crime, and that's when the townspeople emerge. From the alleyways, from the doorways, from the shadows, the blacksmith, the ranch hands, the stable owner. Good, decent people who had been cowed into silence. They form a silent, grim wall, blocking Henderson's path. He stops, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. He looks at their hard, accusing faces, and he knows it's over. He tries to run, but they close in around him, a quiet, inexorable tide of justice. From the boarding house window, Eliza and Thomas watch it all unfold. They see Mrs. Henderson appear at her window, see the moment she understands that the trap they set for others has finally sprung on them. Her scream is shrill and ugly in the clean morning air. The trip to Cheyenne is a somber one. The contents of the deposit box are even more horrific than they imagined. Jewelry, watches, silver combs, letters, and small, precious keepsakes from at least a dozen different women. A dowry of stolen lives. It's all the proof the federal marshals need. The story of the Cedar Ridge murders becomes a sensation. The town is ripped open, its dark secrets exposed to the world. Brody and the Hendersons are tried and sentenced to hang. The town itself has to face its own culpability, its own willful blindness. But for Eliza, Thomas, and Annie, it's the beginning of something new. They return to the farm, not as strangers, bound by circumstance, but as a family forged in fire. They fill in the old well, burying the past for good. Thomas smashes the lock on his bedroom door. Together they clear out the ghosts. They work the land, and under Eliza's patient hands, Sarah's garden begins to bloom again. The house, once stark and silent, is now filled with the sound of Annie's laughter and the soft murmur of Cheyenne lullabies. One evening, months later, they are sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, painting the sky in glorious shades of amber and rose. Annie is asleep inside. Eliza is holding Sarah's quilt in her lap. She's finally finishing it, her own neat stitches lying alongside Sarah's. Two women from two different worlds, their lives woven together by a shared struggle and a shared strength. Thomas reaches out and takes her hand. His hands are still rough and calloused, but to Eliza, they feel like home. "You know," he says quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon, "those letters McKinnon wrote you, the ones filled with all those promises of a good life, a family, a home." He turns to look at her, and his storm gray eyes are clear and full of a love so deep it takes her breath away. He was a liar and a monster, Thomas says. But about that one thing, he was right. You just came to the wrong man. Eliza leans her head on his shoulder, the quilt warm in her lap, and watches the first stars appear in the darkening sky. They don't look cold or distant anymore. They look like promises. She had come to Wyoming looking for a life that had been a lie. But in the ashes of that lie, she had found something real, something true, a home, a family, a love she never thought possible. She had finally been seen. It's amazing how a single moment, a single decision, can change everything. For Eliza, stepping off that train into what she thought was the end of her world was actually the first step into her real life. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most terrifying paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. What do you think? Was it fate that brought Eliza to Cedar Ridge, or just a series of terrible, lucky coincidences? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of survival, mystery, and unexpected love, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. And for more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single one. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.